Hello everyone, you are on the channel, The Middle Ages. Today, we're setting sail on a journey back in time, not to a battlefield or a royal court, but to the bustling, noisy, and absolutely vital heart of medieval life, the port city. Forget the quiet rural villages for a moment. We're diving into a world of towering masts, shouting merchants, and exotic goods from lands you've only heard of in stories. So, grab your sea legs and let's explore what it was really like to live and work in a medieval port. Imagine waking up not to the sound of a rooster, but to the clang of a ship's bell, the rhythmic creaking of ropes, and the shouts of sailors in a dozen different languages. This was the daily soundtrack of a port city, from London and Bristol in England to Venice and Genoa in Italy, or the Hanseatic League, cities like Lübeck and Hamburg. These urban centers were the engines of the medieval economy. They were the gateways to the wider world, places where cultures collided and fortunes were made and lost with the turning of the tide. The very air was different here, thick with the smell of salt, tar, wet wood, and 1,000 other things, spices from the east, fish from the North Sea, wine from France. It was an assault on the senses, exciting and overwhelming all at once. So, who lived in these chaotic, vibrant cities? Well, just about everyone. At the very top, you had the wealthy merchants and ship owners. These were the power players, the medieval equivalent of today's billionaires. They lived in grand stone houses, often right on the waterfront, with their warehouses on the ground floor and their luxurious living quarters above. Their wealth wasn't just in land, it was in fleets of ships, in cargo holds filled with silk, pepper, and saffron. They formed powerful guilds, controlled city councils, and financed kings. Their lives were a high-stakes game of risk and reward. A successful voyage could double their fortune, but a storm, a pirate attack, or a sudden political dispute could ruin them overnight. Then you had the skilled craftsmen, who were essential to the maritime industry. Shipwrights were the masters of their trade, their shipyards a constant hive of activity. The sound of hammers on wood and the smell of hot pitch filled the air as they built the cogs and carracks that were the workhorses of the sea. Coopers were just as vital, crafting the thousands of barrels needed for everything from water and wine to salted fish and grain. Rope makers twisted hemp into miles of sturdy rigging, while sailmakers stitched together vast canvases that would catch the wind. These artisans were the backbone of the port, their skills passed down through generations. They had their own guilds, which protected their trade secrets and ensured a high standard of work. They were the middle class of the port city, respected, relatively well off, and proud of their craft. Of course, no port could function without the sailors. These were the men who faced the dangers of the open sea. Life for a sailor was tough, filled with hard labor, rough conditions, and the constant threat of shipwreck or disease. When they were in port, they were a force to be reckoned with. They crowded the taverns and inns that lined the waterfront, spending their hard-earned wages on drink and entertainment. These waterfront districts were often the roughest parts of the city, a maze of narrow, winding alleys filled with sailors looking for a good time and all the people who catered to them. Tavern keepers, brewers, cooks, and entertainers. It was a world away from the stately homes of the merchants, but it was just as alive and just as important to the city's character. And let's not forget the dock workers, or stevedores. These were the muscles of the port. From dawn till dusk, they swarmed the quays, loading and unloading the endless stream of cargo. Their work was back-breaking, using little more than their own strength, simple cranes and handcarts. They moved barrels, bales, and crates that weighed hundreds of pounds. They were paid by the day, and their livelihood depended on the constant arrival and departure of ships. When the port was busy, they worked. When trade slowed, they went hungry. Theirs was a precarious existence at the bottom of the social ladder. But without them, the entire commercial enterprise would grind to a halt. Now, what about the goods themselves? The medieval port was a global marketplace. Imagine walking through a warehouse. In one corner you might see fine English wool, prized all over Europe. Next to it, barrels of herring from the Baltic, a staple food for rich and poor alike. Further in, you'd find casks of wine from Bordeaux, destined for the cellars of nobles and wealthy merchants. But the real treasures were the goods from the east, brought over land along the Silk Road, or by sea through treacherous waters. Spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg were worth more than their weight in gold. They weren't just for flavor, they were a status symbol, silks from China, dyes like indigo, and precious stones added to the dazzling array of luxury items. This flow of goods didn't just bring wealth, it brought new ideas, new technologies, and a growing awareness of a world beyond the horizon. This constant movement of people and goods also brought significant dangers. The most obvious was piracy. The seas were not safe. Pirates, whether they were the notorious Barbary corsairs in the Mediterranean or opportunistic raiders in the English Channel, were a constant menace. Merchants often armed their ships or sailed in convoys for protection, but an even greater, invisible threat arrived on these ships: disease. The crowded, often unsanitary conditions of both the ships and the port cities made them perfect breeding grounds for epidemics. The most devastating example, of course, was the Black Death in the mid-14th century. It's widely believed to have entered Europe through Italian trading ports, carried by rats on merchant ships from the Black Sea. The plague spread like wildfire through the packed urban populations, wiping out up to half the population in some cities. It was a terrifying reminder of the port city's double-edged nature, a source of both prosperity and peril. Despite the dangers, the port city was a place of opportunity. It was more diverse and more dynamic than almost anywhere else in the medieval world. You'd meet people from all over Europe and beyond. A Genoese merchant might be negotiating with a Flemish cloth trader, while a German sailor shared a drink with a Portuguese fisherman. This melting pot created a unique urban culture, one that was often more tolerant and open-minded than in the rural interior. New words, new foods, and new customs were constantly being introduced. The port city was a window to the world, and living there gave you a perspective that was simply unavailable to someone who had never left their home village. It was a place where social mobility was possible. A clever, ambitious boy could start as a cabin boy on a ship and with luck and skill end up as a wealthy captain or merchant. The rigid social structures of feudalism were weaker here, replaced by a new hierarchy based on wealth and commercial success. Governing these complex cities was a major challenge. They were often granted royal charters that gave them a high degree of self-government. Power was typically held by a city council, dominated by the most powerful merchant guilds. They were responsible for everything from maintaining the city walls and harbor infrastructure to regulating markets, collecting taxes, and administering justice. These councils funded the construction of impressive public buildings, town halls, guild halls, and large churches that were designed to showcase the city's wealth and civic pride. These buildings still stand in many of Europe's former port cities, a testament to the power and ambition of their medieval citizens. Life wasn't always peaceful, though. Rivalries between different guilds, tensions between the rich merchants and the working poor, and disputes with neighboring lords, or even the king, could erupt into street riots and political turmoil. As the Middle Ages drew to a close and the Age of Discovery dawned, the importance of these port cities only grew. New trade routes to the Americas and around Africa to Asia would shift the center of economic power from the Mediterranean and the Baltic to the Atlantic coasts of Spain, Portugal, England, and the Netherlands. But the fundamental character of the port city remained the same, a place of risk and reward, of hard work and new horizons, a bustling, multicultural hub connecting a vast and ever-expanding world. The sounds, smells, and struggles of the medieval port laid the foundation for the globalized world we live in today. It was here, on these crowded quays and windswept docks, that the modern world began to take shape. Thank you so much for joining us on this voyage to the medieval port city. It's a fascinating corner of history that shows us a side of the Middle Ages that's all about connection, commerce, and change. What part of medieval life would you like us to explore next? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next trip back in time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.